Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Usually, when we look at a historical timeline, there's this strict expectation of precision.
Right, like an exact science.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It feels almost like structural engineering. You dig up a cornerstone, radiocarbon date a wooden beam, and the archaeologist just points to a chart and says, there it is, found it in exactly this year, fell in exactly that year.
We crave that certainty.
Yeah.
I mean, we really like history to be visible, neatly categorized with firm borders on a map and, rigid dates on a calendar.
Right.
The binary nature of established versus not established provides a very comforting illusion of order.
But then you step into the world of Southeast Asian antiquity. Specifically, we're looking at the Ping River Valley in northern Thailand. And suddenly, that precision instrument we rely on just shatters.
Completely shatters.
We are looking at a historical landscape where the truth is, well, it's buried beneath layers of intense mythology. Today, we're going on a deep dive into the Haripunjaya kingdom.
Which is such a compelling topic.
It really is. This was a Mon state centered around modern-day Lamphun, flourishing from approximately the 8th century until 1292. Our objective for this deep dive is to navigate the tension between deeply mythologized religious chronicles texts, like the 15th century Kamadevivasa, and the concrete, undeniable archaeological and epigraphic evidence we actually pull out of the dirt.
Because there is a serious disconnect there.
Definitely. We want to uncover how a highly sophisticated society served as the primary conduit for Theravada Buddhism, language, and culture into northern Thailand long before the Thai-speaking kingdoms dominated the region.
To even begin understanding Haripunjaya, we have to fundamentally discard our modern post-Westphalian notions of what a state or a country looks like.
Okay, discard the maps.
Right. We're dealing with a mandala state.
I'm having a hard time visualizing this. I mean, if I'm a rice farmer living in a mandala state during the 9th century, who am I paying my taxes to?
Good question.
How do I even know what country I live in if there are no surveyed borders?
You might not know, and frankly, you might not care. In the ancient Southeast Asian context, a mandala state does not define itself by hard surveyed borders drawn on a map.
So no boundary stones.
Exactly. Instead, power radiates from a center. Think of a very bright lantern in a pitch-black room.
Okay.
The light is blinding at the source, but it gradually fades into the shadows the further away you get. The center, in this case, the fortified capital city of Lamphun, is where the king or queen holds absolute, undisputed authority. They control the military, the granaries, the high courts.
And as you walk away from that lantern out into the rural peripheries, that light fades.
Yes, exactly. As you move outward, that central authority weakens. Local village leaders or chieftains operate in the dim light.
Right.
They might pay tribute to the center, but if they're located halfway between Lamphun and a rival kingdom, they might pay tribute to multiple overlapping centers of power simultaneously.
Just hedging their bets.
And entirely depending on whose army marched through most recently.
So it's less about owning specific square mileage and more about personal allegiances, tribute networks, and, spheres of influence.
The borders breathe in and out.
Depending on the strength of the monarch.
That flexibility is precisely what allowed Haripunjaya to survive for over 500 years. They acted as a vital cultural bridge between the older Mandvarvadi networks of central Thailand and the newer arriving populations in the north.
Which makes the official origin story of this kingdom so compelling, because the official chronicles completely ignore that complexity.
They absolutely do.
If we read the traditional texts, they claim that before the mid-7th century, the Ping River Valley was essentially an empty, untamed jungle.
Just wilderness.
Right. The narrative insists that ascetic hermits, specifically a figure named Sudeva, also known as Wasithep, wandered into this wilderness, gathered up a few primitive locals, and decided to build a city from scratch.
It's the quintessential foundation myth. The chronologists needed a blank canvas.
To make themselves look better.
Exactly. By framing the landscape as an empty jungle, the hermits act as the initial civilizing force, preparing the barren ground for a divine royal presence.
But the archaeology ruins that story.
It completely upends it. When we examine the stratigraphy of archaeological excavations, particularly at the Ban Wang Hai Cemetery situated just south of modern Lamphun, the dirt tells a totally different story.
The archaeologists didn't find an empty jungle.
Not at all.
They unearthed a thriving, complex settlement known as Sementaraparat, with human activity dating back over 2,000 years.
Long before the formal establishment of the Mon state, the Ping River Valley was heavily populated by highly organized agricultural communities, and they were intricately connected to the wider world.
Let's talk about those connections.
Well, the graves at Banwang Hai are filled with iron tools, which requires a deep understanding of metallurgy, forging, and high-temperature kilns.
Hmm.
Even more telling, they found sophisticated bronze ornaments.
Right. And not just any bronze.
No, some of these bronze pieces possess direct metallurgical and stylistic links to the Dongsun culture.
We should break down what the Dongsun culture signifies in this context.
The Dongsun culture originated in the Red River Delta of northern Vietnam and southern China, thriving in the first millennium BCE. They were master bronze casters, famous for their enormous, intricately decorated bronze drums.
So finding Dongsun-style bronze in northern Thailand means this empty jungle was actually plugged into a vast regional trade network dealing in high-status luxury goods.
Exactly. They were deeply connected.
But the trade network stretches much further than Vietnam. Archaeologists at Ban Wang Hai also pulled glass beads from the soil that originated in Indo-Roman trade networks.
Which is just staggering to think about.
We have a settlement in northern Thailand, trading, either directly or through intermediaries, with the Roman world thousands of miles away. How does a glass bead even make that journey in antiquity?
It relies entirely on the monsoon winds. Merchant ships would catch the seasonal winds from the Roman-controlled Red Sea ports, sail across the Indian Ocean to coastal hubs in India, like Arakamadu.
Yeah.
And from there, goods were traded across the Bay of Bengal, eventually moving overland through the river valleys of Southeast Asia.
The sheer volume of material culture is staggering. There's a specific excavation phase 5 and test pit 1 at Ban Wang Hai that provides a very intimate look at these pre-state people.
That's a crucial find.
Yeah, archaeologists carefully brushed away the soil to reveal a prehistoric ceramic bowl intentionally placed at the very foot of a human skeleton, buried alongside iron implements.
That specific arrangement is not refuse or accidental accumulation.
It's intentional.
Highly intentional. Placing a vessel at the feet of the deceased indicates established, complex burial rituals. It suggests a structured belief system regarding the afterlife, where the dead require sustenance or tools in the next world.
There is another artifact that completely unravels the empty jungle myth. In 1985, the Fine Arts Department of Thailand discovered a clay figurine in Lamphun.
Oh, the Lamphun figure, yes.
It depicts a stocky, nude boy wearing only a belt and a necklace. The reason this figurine shifts our understanding is that it's a perfect stylistic match for figurines found far to the south, at the central Dvaravati site of Chanson.
The Dvaravati culture was a loose network of Mon city-states in central Thailand that shared a common language, artistic style, and adherence to Buddhism.
So they were already connected to the Mon culture.
Yes. The presence of this figurine in Lamphun proves that the indigenous people of the Ping River Valley, known historically as the Lawa or Lua people, were already interacting with and perhaps absorbing elements of the Mon Varavati culture long before a formal state was declared.
So if the ground is full of advanced Roman glass, Dongsun bronze, and Varavati art, why did later chronologists feel the necessity to invent a story about a jungle populated by primitive locals?
Because acknowledging a sophisticated pre-existing indigenous society diminishes the glory of the founders.
Right, it takes away their credit.
Exactly. The incoming monoliths from the south did not build a civilization from scratch. They integrated with and eventually dominated a long-established local population.
They just took over the existing infrastructure.
The trade networks, the agricultural foundation, the iron technology, all of this was already functioning. The monoliths simply layered their own administrative control, their written language, and their state-sponsored religion over an existing economic engine.
It all comes down to the person the chronicles claim civilized this region, Queen Kamadevi. She serves as the absolute central figure in the cultural memory of northern Thailand.
Truly the anchor of the kingdom's identity.
The chronicles date her reign to around 662, though modern epigraphers adjust this to roughly 750.
Her origin story is an intricate weave of political propaganda and local folklore, mainly because there are two entirely different versions competing for dominance.
Which is always a red flag for historians.
Right. According to the formal religious text, the Kamadevivasa, she was an aristocratic, highly educated princess of the Lavo kingdom, which corresponds to modern-day Lopburi in central Thailand.
But the local mythology, the stories passed down by the people living in the villages, tells a much more localized tale.
A very different vibe.
In that version, she wasn't born royal at all. She was the daughter of a wealthy village man in Nongdu. When she was just 3 months old, a giant bird swooped down from the sky, snatched the infant in its talons, and flew her over Doi Suthep Mountain.
The legend states the bird dropped her, and she was subsequently found and raised by the hermit Sudeva.
The same hermit who supposedly founded the city.
Exactly. He recognized her inherent royal destiny, provided her with a rigorous education, and when she turned 13, he constructed a raft and sent her drifting down the river to the Lavo Kingdom.
And she just shows up in Lavo.
Well, upon her arrival, the king and queen of Lavo were so captivated by her presence that they adopted her as a royal princess.
Regardless of whether she was born in a palace or dropped by an eagle, the narrative converges with her as a princess in Lavo. Around 750, the hermits who had established the initial footprint of the new city of Haripunjaya formally invited her to be their first monarch.
And she accepts the invitation and journeys 7 months up the Ping River by boat.
And she doesn't travel lightly. The texts state she brought an enormous retinue. We're talking 500 monks, 500 scholars, 500 craftsmen, and a highly venerated sacred white crystal Buddha.
We should pause and consider the logistics of that journey.
It's unbelievable.
Moving thousands of people up a river system against the current for 7 months requires an immense supply chain. She's not just moving a royal household.
Right.
She is transplanting an entire administrative, religious, and industrial apparatus from central Thailand into the Northern Valley.
She essentially brought a state in a box. She imported the personnel required to establish a centralized bureaucracy, build monumental architecture, and institute a formal legal code.
However, her arrival was met with immediate fierce resistance.
From the locals who were already there.
Yes. This is where she encounters the indigenous Lawa people, specifically their powerful ruler, Kunwang Walanka of Raming Nakhon.
Walanka hears about her arrival and her legendary beauty, and he immediately proposes marriage. Kamadevi refuses the offer.
And Walanka does not accept the rejection gracefully.
No, he doesn't. He mobilizes his forces and declares war.
What stands out in the historical texts is Kamadevi's response. She doesn't delegate the defense of her new kingdom to a male general or rely on a champion.
She takes charge.
She takes command of the military forces herself. She secures strategic alliances from neighboring kingdoms, outmaneuvers the Lawa forces, and achieves a decisive victory on the battlefield.
I want to examine her strategy after the battle because it reveals a deeply pragmatic approach to statecraft. She was pregnant before leaving Lavo, and shortly after taking the throne of Haripunjaya, she gave birth to twin sons, Mahantayot and Anantayot. After defeating Walanka in a bloody war, she integrates the hostile indigenous populations by marrying her twin sons to Walanka's 2 daughters.
The chronicles often obscure these events with layers of supernatural narrative, tales of magical elephants or divine interventions during the battle. But when we strip away the magic, the marriage alliance is pure, calculated diplomacy.
It reminds me of grafting a new branch onto an old, deeply rooted tree. You don't chop down the old tree because you need its root system to survive.
That's a great way to look at it.
Instead, you bind the new branch to the old trunk until they heal together and share the same vascular system. By marrying her Mon sons to the Lao daughters, she guaranteed that the next generation of rulers would possess both Mon and indigenous Lawa blood.
It forces a shared destiny. She transformed a hostile, resentful borderland population into a permanent political ally, ensuring long-term stability for her fledgling kingdom.
And she didn't stop there.
No. Furthermore, she established a legacy of profound religious patronage to heal the spiritual wounds of the conflict.
There is a very specific narrative vignette in the chronicles detailing her reaction to the aftermath of the war with Walanka. She surveys the battlefield, sees the heavy casualties on both sides, and experiences profound sorrow.
So she acts on it.
Right, to honor the dead and generate spiritual merit, she orders the construction of a temple directly on the site of the carnage.
This act serves multiple purposes. It's an act of mourning, but it also firmly plants Theravada Buddhism into the physical landscape, establishing it as the moral and structural center of her new kingdom.
She ruled for many years, eventually abdicating her throne to focus entirely on ascetic Buddhist practice, leaving Mahantayot to rule Haripunjaya and Anantayot to rule the neighboring state of Lampang.
You have this brilliant geopolitical strategist who built a kingdom that lasted 5 centuries. But, and this is a big but, the people who wrote her story centuries later decided to alter the timeline.
The manipulation of time is one of the most compelling aspects of studying Haripunjaya. The primary texts for this era are the Kamadevatha, written in the early 15th century by a monk named Bodhiramsi, and the Jina Kalamali, composed slightly later in the 16th century.
Both of these chronicles were written in Pali, the ancient liturgical language of Theravada Buddhism.
These texts confidently state, with absolute authority, that Haripunjaya was founded between the years 629 and 662. Yet modern historians entirely reject that timeline.
The foundational work to correct this chronology was conducted by the French historian and epigrapher Georges Coudès.
What did he find?
He meticulously analyzed the epigraphic evidence, the actual text carved into stone styles found throughout the region, and cross-referenced those inscriptions with known, verified regional events and astronomical data.
So he used the hard data.
Yes. He determined conclusively that the traditional dates recorded in the chronicles are roughly a century too early. The true political founding of Haripunjaya under Kamadevi was likely around 750.
If the monks writing the chronicles had access to local history, why would they deliberately push the dates back a full century? What's the motive behind falsifying the calendar?
The alteration of the timeline was a theological necessity, not a historical mistake or a clerical error. The chronologists needed to legitimize the kingdom's Theravada institutions.
So they needed older roots?
Exactly. By extending the timeline backward, they could align the founding of the city and the lineage of its rulers with the legendary visits of the Gautama Buddha to the Southeast Asian region.
They're constructing a sacred geography. They're essentially writing a narrative that says, our kingdom is so holy and our rulers are so legitimate that the Buddha himself stood on this very ground and prophesied our creation.
Exactly. But it creates a profound dilemma for anyone trying to study this period.
That's exactly what I'm wrestling with. If we know for a fact that the authors deliberately falsified the dates to serve a religious agenda, how can we trust anything else written in the Kamadevisa? Why do we believe Kamadevi or her twin sons existed at all?
This requires us to understand how pre-modern societies consumed texts. The Kamadevivasa was never intended to be a strict objective history book in the modern sense.
Right.
It is a deeply religious document. Its structure mirrors a Jataka tale.
Could you explain the mechanics of a Jataka tale for those unfamiliar with Buddhist literature?
Sure. Jataka tales are the traditional voluminous body of literature native to India concerning the previous births of Gautama Buddha in both human and animal form. They are moral fables.
Got it.
The Kamadevivasa adopts this theological framing. The narrative opens with the Buddha delivering a prophecy about the future city, and it concludes centuries later when King Adityaraja discovers a sacred relic, perfectly fulfilling the initial prophecy. It's a closed, perfect narrative loop.
But within that theological loop, there's real history.
Yes. Bodhiramsi wrote this text in the 15th century long after Haripunjaya had fallen to the Lana kingdom. His goal was to establish an unbroken cultural and spiritual continuity between the ancient Mon kingdom and the later Thai rulers who conquered it.
He wanted to prove the current rulers were the rightful inheritors of an ancient sacred legacy.
While the dates are adjusted for theological alignment, the sequence of events, the existence of the monarchs, and the broad geopolitical struggles are frequently verified by the physical stone inscriptions. The core historical scaffolding is entirely real, even if the timeline is stretched to fit a divine narrative.
While monks in the 15th century were wrestling with theology and timelines, the actual people living in Haripunjaya during the 11th century were wrestling with sheer survival. If we look at the geopolitical map of the era, Haripunjaya was in an incredibly precarious position.
They were completely surrounded by expanding, aggressive powers.
Right.
To their west, they faced the formidable Burmese pagan kingdom. To the north, the Tibeto-Burman Dali kingdom, based in modern-day Yunnan.
Yeah, to the south.
To the south and east, the relentless expansion of the Khmer Empire.
Facing three aggressive empires is daunting enough. But in the mid-11th century, during the reign of King Kambalaraja, the kingdom was devastated by an entirely different kind of invader, a severe biological threat, a cholera plague.
The chronicles record a catastrophic 6-year epidemic. Cholera is a brutal, waterborne bacterial infection.
And in a river valley, that's a nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. In a densely populated, heavily irrigated agricultural center like Lamphun, where the water supply is deeply integrated into daily life and rice cultivation, the disease would spread with terrifying speed. It causes rapid, severe dehydration.
The situation became so desperate, the death toll so high, that the population simply couldn't sustain itself in the Ping River Valley. The social fabric began to collapse, forcing a mass exodus. The citizens fled south, migrating to the coastal Mon city of Thatan, which was also known as Sutamarnagra.
Organizing a mass migration of a weakened, diseased population over hundreds of miles of rugged terrain is a logistical nightmare. And when they finally reached Thatton, seeking refuge among fellow Mon speakers, they found no peace.
Because of the politics of the time.
Right, the king of Pagan, an aggressive neighbor to Thetan, constantly harassed the city.
They could not catch a break. Driven out of their home by disease, and now driven out of their refuge by war. They were forced to flee once again, migrating further east to the city of Pegu.
And they stayed there for a while.
They lived as stateless refugees in Pegu until the epidemic in Haripunjaya finally subsided years later, allowing the survivors to march back up the river and reclaim their homeland.
We often view these historical events purely as tragedies, but the mechanics of this exile produced a profound cultural evolution.
It wasn't just a lost decade.
No, this wasn't a temporary displacement where they lived in isolation. They were immersed in a different Mon culture in Pegu.
It's forced cultural cross-pollination. When the citizens finally returned to Haripunjaya, they didn't just bring back their surviving families, they brought back Bigumon traditions, weaving new customs into their society.
The most prominent example is a tradition called the Loy Hamod Festival.
This took place during the rainy season.
Yes. The returned citizens introduced this Pegu festival of floating offerings on the water to pay respect to the river spirits and the Buddha. Over the centuries, this tradition took deep root, spread, and eventually evolved into the famous modern Thai festival of Loy Krathong.
Where thousands of illuminated, decorated baskets are floated on the rivers under the full moon.
Exactly.
It's a really compelling paradox. A devastating public health crisis forces an entire population into exile, subjecting them to war and displacement. Yet, because of that trauma, they absorb a new cultural practice that becomes one of the most beautiful, enduring traditions of modern Thailand.
It shows how porous and adaptable culture was within these mandala networks.
While disease forced the population to flee in the 11th century, political realities soon forced them to fortify their walls. By the 12th century, the geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia had shifted dramatically, and the threat was coming from the south.
The Khmer Empire was expanding rapidly, fueled by a massive, highly organized war machine. Under ambitious rulers like Suryavarman I and later Suryavarman II, the Khmers had systematically annexed much of the surrounding region.
They even conquered Lavo, the very city Queen Kamadeti had originally come from centuries earlier.
The Khmer influence was a monolithic force, pushing steadily northward, threatening to absorb the relatively isolated state of Haripunjaya and extinguish its independence entirely.
But Haripunjaya doesn't just fold.
No, this intense pressure cooker produces one of Haripunjaya's most significant and resilient rulers, King Adityaraja.
Adityaraja has a fascinating backstory that perfectly illustrates the chaos of the era. He wasn't born in Lamphun. He was originally a prince of a state called Suphanabhum. When the Khmer war machine annexed his home, he became a royal refugee.
He had to run.
He fled north, navigated the complex political networks, and eventually secured the throne of Haripunjaya.
He understood the Khmer threat intimately because it had already cost him his original home. He knew that diplomacy and tribute would not stop their expansion, so he took an incredibly aggressive stance.
The best defense is a good offense.
He didn't wait for the Khmers to march on his walls. He launched preemptive counteroffensives.
But the Khmer military was overwhelmingly powerful. They utilized heavily armored war elephants, complex supply trains, and advanced siege weaponry. Adityaraja's initial attacks were decisively repulsed.
It didn't go well at first.
The Khmer forces broke his lines and pursued his retreating army all the way back to the Ping River Valley, laying siege to the capital city of Lamphun itself.
The Khmers had systematically dismantled dozens of other Monbarabadi states, yet Haripunjaya withstood multiple sustained sieges.
How did they manage to survive when everyone else fell? How do you keep a city alive when an empire surrounds your walls?
Their survival relied on a combination of extreme geographical isolation and brilliant defensive engineering. Geographically, the Ping River Valley is positioned far from the Khmer center of power in Angkor.
It's a long walk.
Stretching supply lines across hundreds of miles of dense forest and mountainous terrain to feed a besieging army is a logistical nightmare. The longer a siege lasts, the more the attacking army starves.
And when the Khmers finally reached the city, they found it wasn't an easy target.
The capital was a fortress. It featured a vast, oval-shaped enclosure of thick, heavily fired brick walls, roughly 2.5 kilometers in circumference.
Firing that many bricks requires an enormous amount of firewood and labor, indicating a society completely mobilized for defense.
And those formidable walls were surrounded by a wide, deep moat fed directly by the Kuang River. A moat fed by a flowing river provides the defenders with an inexhaustible water supply.
while simultaneously preventing the attackers from tunneling under the walls or bringing siege engines close.
Aditya utilized this defensive advantage perfectly. He waited behind his flooded moats and brick walls as the Khmer supply lines broke down and their armies withered.
But he didn't just play defense forever.
No, once he successfully repelled the sieges, he went back on the offensive. He forged a strategic alliance with his former home of Sufanavhum.
And he made a huge move in 1052.
Yes, he mobilized his forces, marched south, and successfully annexed Lavo right out of Khmer control. To solidify this victory, he placed his own brother, Chatachoda, on the throne of Lavo.
By putting his brother on the throne of the city his ancestors came from, he temporarily broke the Khmer hegemony in the Menam Valley. It was a bold, defiant assertion of Mon independence against the greatest superpower in the region.
Having secured their borders against the Khmers, the subsequent kings of Haripunjaya could finally turn their attention inward. They no longer had to pour every ounce of their economic surplus into warfare and barricades.
They could actually build a society.
This period of sustained stability ushered in a profound golden age of religious devotion, monumental construction, and cultural output.
This golden age reaches its zenith in the early 13th century, particularly under the reign of King Sabati Sidi. For historians, this era is incredibly valuable because it transitions us from the realm of later chronicles to concrete primary evidence.
We finally have extensive epigraphic data.
Hard evidence.
We're talking about the stone inscriptions, specifically the Wat Don and Wat Kukut inscriptions, which are precisely dated to the years 1213, 1218, and 1219.
These stones offer a direct window into the administrative mechanics of the kingdom.
They're invaluable. The inscriptions are carved primarily in the Old Mon script, heavily interspersed with sacred Pali passages. The Old Mon script itself is a fascinating cultural artifact. It evolved from the ancient Pallava scripts of southern India,
which spread across the Bay of Bengal via maritime trade routes centuries earlier.
Exactly.
The fact that Haripunjaya was still carving official state edicts in Old Mon as late as the 13th century proves definitively that they maintained a distinct, cohesive cultural identity, resisting complete assimilation by the surrounding powers. But what are they actually writing on these stones? They aren't just boasting about military victories, right?
Not at all. The inscriptions are highly detailed administrative and legal documents. They record royal endowments. They detail the king dedicating specific tracts of agricultural land, herds of livestock, and even specific families of slaves to the upkeep of the monasteries.
So they were managing the logistics of faith.
Yes. They document the exact dimensions of newly constructed stupas and outline the daily administration of religious life.
This gives us a clear picture of the religious daily life of the average citizen. You have this orthodox Theravada Buddhism imported from Sri Lanka, with monks rigorously studying Pali texts and living by strict monastic codes. But outside the temple walls, they were living alongside the indigenous Lawa people, whose belief systems were deeply rooted in animism.
It's a very complex ecosystem of faith. It's a textbook example of religious syncretism.
How does that actually work in practice? Does the Orthodox religion try to stamp out the local beliefs?
In many historical contexts, yes. But here, the Orthodox Theravada Buddhism didn't attempt to aggressively erase the local Lawa animism. The local guardian spirits, known as Fi, were deeply ingrained in the agricultural cycles. Spirits of the river, spirits of the forest, spirits of the rice field.
You can't simply banish them without alienating the entire farming population.
So instead of fighting them, they absorbed them.
That's smart.
The animist spirits were incorporated into the broader Buddhist cosmology. They were rebranded, essentially, as protective deities that were subordinate to the Buddhist Sangha.
So the two systems coexist.
You'd have villagers making offerings of food or incense to a local river spirit for a good harvest, right alongside monks chanting Pali Sutras in the main hall. Both systems operated in tandem to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom.
It really reframes how we should view the monasteries themselves. We tend to think of a monastery purely as a secluded place of quiet, ascetic worship. But in Haripunjaya, these monastic centers were the absolute heart of the urban infrastructure.
They were the hubs of society.
They functioned as the universities, the hospitals, the city halls, and the welfare offices of the ancient world. They managed vast tracts of agricultural land, distributed charity to the poor, mediated local legal disputes, and employed the scribes who meticulously copied the manuscripts, preserving the kingdom's history.
To support an institution that massive, well, that enormous, you need an economic engine firing on all cylinders. You can't employ scribes, feed hundreds of monks, and build massive brick stupas without a severe, sustained agricultural surplus.
The wealth of Haripunjaya relied on three fundamental pillars. The first was intensive wet rice cultivation. They utilized the predictable seasonal floods of the Ping River, channeling the nutrient-rich water into complex irrigation networks to support a dense population.
The second pillar was resource extraction.
Specifically, teak logging, utilizing highly trained, domesticated Asian elephants to move heavy timber out of the dense forests. And the third pillar was international trade.
The mechanics of their trade currency are deeply intricate. For small, everyday transactions in the local markets, they utilized cowrie shells.
Which had to be brought in from the ocean.
Right, these shells had to be imported all the way from the distant coasts, and they were measured in specific units called laksa, which epigraphers believe represented units of 10,000 shells.
Carrying tens of thousands of shells for a large purchase seems incredibly inefficient.
Which is why, for larger state-level transactions or international trade, they transitioned to standardized weights of precious metals, specifically silver and copper. They utilized a very specific mon-weight system called the decal. This dual currency system demonstrates a highly sophisticated, tiered economy.
All of this immense economic power was funneled directly into their architecture. The absolute crown jewel of the kingdom is Wat Phra, that Haripunjaya. According to the foundational legends, this temple was built by King Adityaraja to enshrine a sacred hair relic of the Buddha.
The central feature is an enormous 46-meter-high chedi, which was famously covered in gleaming copper plates.
It was designed to be a blinding beacon of religious authority visible for miles. And inside the complex is a highly venerated bronze image cast much later, in 1489, known colloquially as the Buddha with sharp shins.
But perhaps even more architecturally distinct and historically revealing is Wat Chamadevi, which is also known as Wat Kukut.
This temple was severely damaged by an earthquake and subsequently rebuilt by King Sabatisiri in the year 1218. When you look at Wat Chamadevi, it's visually arresting. It is a 21-meter-tall, square, stepped pyramid.
It's very unique for the area.
It looks almost like something you'd encounter in the jungles of Central America, though its actual architectural lineage traces back through regional networks to Sri Lanka.
The structure is highly symbolic. Each of its 5 diminishing tiers features intricate niches, and standing inside those niches are 60 towering Buddha images crafted from stucco and brick.
What's particularly striking about those 60 Buddhas is their posture. They're all standing in the Abhaya Mudra.
The Abhaya Mudra is the posture of dispelling fear. The Buddha stands with the right hand raised, palm facing outward.
I always wonder why a society chooses a specific posture for their dominant religious iconography. Why the posture of dispelling fear?
Consider their geopolitical reality. They were a single, isolated Mon Valley surrounded by the vast Khmer Empire to the south, the aggressive pagan kingdom to the west, and the migrating Thai tribes to the north.
So they had a lot to be afraid of.
Fear of invasion, fear of plague, fear of assimilation, fear was their default state. The 60 Buddhas, standing tall, projecting fearlessness in all directions, was a theological shield for a deeply anxious kingdom.
Creating those statues, along with the thousands of ceramic vessels required for daily life and trade, required an advanced scientific understanding of pyrotechnology. The potters of Haripunjaya weren't just digging up random mud from the riverbank and throwing it into a bonfire.
The archaeological excavations at kilns near Banwang Hai and Ban Shrioy reveal an immense level of industrial specialization. Archaeologists have identified 4 distinct, carefully formulated types of clay used by Haripunjaya artisans.
They understood the chemical properties of their materials. They utilized a dense, heavy gray clay mixed with specific mineral inclusions to prevent cracking for their large utilitarian storage wares. But for high-status decorative purposes, they developed something entirely different.
They engineered a highly refined, bright orange clay that was used specifically as a decorative slip.
A slip is a very thin liquid clay mixture that you apply to the surface of a pot before firing it in the kiln. It gives the final product a brilliant color and a perfectly smooth texture.
But using a slip requires a mastery of thermal expansion. If the orange slip shrinks in the kiln at a different rate than the dense gray clay underneath it, the entire pot will shatter or the surface will flake off.
The potters of Haripunjaya had mastered the precise kiln temperatures and clay formulations required to mass-produce these high-quality ceramics.
That mastery extended to their specific artistic style, which became a visual declaration of their identity. When you examine a late Haripunjaya Buddha statue, it possesses highly distinct facial features.
A broad, square face, a wide forehead.
Deeply connected ridged eyebrows that form a continuous band across the brow, and very full, fleshy, pouting lips.
This aesthetic is uniquely Mon. It served as a distinct visual boundary marker. In a world where borders were fluid, art was rigid. It was a conscious method of declaring their unique cultural identity.
Visually separating themselves from the blocky, powerful Karm styles to the south and the emerging, softer Thai styles to the north.
But despite its economic wealth, its deeply rooted cultural identity, and its formidable kiln-fired brick defenses, the 5-century reign of Haripunjaya came to an end. And the end didn't arrive at the tip of a battering ram. It came from within.
By the late 13th century, the geopolitical landscape of the entire Asian continent was undergoing a seismic shift. The Thai-speaking peoples were migrating south into the region in enormous waves.
A movement driven in part by the intense pressure of the Mongol expansions under Kublai Khan, far to the north in China.
Among these migrating Thai leaders was King Mangrai. He was the ruler of Mgonyang and the future founder of the powerful Lan Na kingdom. Mangrai was a brilliant, patient strategist.
He set his sights on Haripunjaya.
Because he knew the city was the wealthiest, most agriculturally productive prize in the northern valleys.
But Mangrai was also a realist. He studied the history. He recognized that a direct, brute-force siege on the fortified, moated city of Lamphun would be excessively costly in terms of blood and resources.
The brick walls had successfully repelled the mighty Khmer Empire centuries earlier. They could certainly repel his forces.
So, instead of using his army, Mangrai utilizes espionage. He plays a very long, very patient game. Mangrai takes one of his most trusted, intelligent operatives, a merchant named Aifa, and sends him into Haripunjaya on a covert multi-year mission.
Aifai's infiltration of the Haripunjaya court is a historical masterclass in political subversion. He presents himself as a highly competent, loyal administrator. Over years of careful maneuvering, he gains the absolute, unwavering trust of Haripunjaya's last Mon ruler, King Yiba.
Aifa rises through the ranks until he's promoted to the dual position of chief minister and royal preceptor. He is essentially handed the keys to the kingdom.
He is running the database administration, managing the courts, and advising the king on all matters of state.
And once he holds the levers of absolute power, he begins to systematically dismantle the kingdom from the inside out. He doesn't use a sword, he uses bureaucracy.
It's insidious.
It reminds me of introducing an invasive species into a balanced ecosystem. The invasive species doesn't violently destroy the forest overnight. It quietly changes the soil chemistry. It redirects the water flow. It slowly starves the native plants of sunlight.
Until the entire ecosystem collapses under its own weight.
Exactly. Aifa enacted incredibly harsh, oppressive policies designed specifically to break the spirit of the people.
His most devastating tactic involved the manipulation of corvée labor.
Corvée labor is essentially a tax paid to the state in the form of physical work, usually for public infrastructure projects like clearing canals or building temples.
Yes, and traditionally, corvée labor was strictly limited to the dry season, when the farmers had finished the harvest and had free time. Aifa deliberately altered this. He aggressively demanded excessive corvée labor during the peak of the harvest season.
If you pull the farmers out of the field exactly when the rice needs to be harvested, the crop rots in the water.
Precisely. By forcing the population to dig canals and cut timber when they should have been harvesting food, he engineered widespread famine. On top of this, he implemented oppressive, arbitrary taxation, further impoverishing the citizens.
He systematically alienated the local Lawa and Mon populations from their ruler, King Yiba.
He engineered a total crisis of legitimacy. He made the king appear cruel, incompetent, and deeply out of touch with the suffering of his own people. Once the population was sufficiently disgruntled, starving, and the entire administrative apparatus was paralyzed by internal resentment and corruption, Aifa quietly sent word north to King Mangrai.
The target was ready.
The strategy worked flawlessly. When Mangrai finally marched his Thai army to the walls of Lamphun in the year 1292, there was virtually no resistance. The populace was too physically exhausted, starved, and politically alienated to pick up weapons and defend the city for a king they now despised.
King Yiba realized the walls wouldn't save him if the people refused to man them. He was forced to abandon his capital and flee south to the neighboring state of Lampang. Mangrai walked through the gates, and the 5-century run of the Haripunjaya kingdom effectively ended without a major battle.
However, this is where the historical narrative takes a deeply fascinating turn. Mangrai won the military conflict, he took the physical city, but when we look at the aftermath, we have to ask who really conquered whom.
Because even though the political entity of Haripunjaya was extinguished, its culture completely overwhelmed its conquerors.
Mangrai and his newly formed Lan Na kingdom didn't burn the Mon culture to the ground, they absorbed it wholesale. They recognized the administrative and spiritual superiority of the civilization they had just captured. The Thai rulers adopted Haripunjaya's Theravada Buddhism as their own state religion.
They adopted the Mon legal frameworks to govern their new empire. They mimicked the Haripunjaya architectural styles when building their own temples. They heavily utilized the Mon script, integrating it into their own language for official administration and religious texts.
The conquerors essentially put on the clothes of the conquered.
It leaves you with a profound realization about the nature of history and the limits of military power. A sword can end a royal lineage, and espionage can open a city gate. But military conquest is rarely the end of the cultural story.
So true.
It makes you wonder how often in history this exact dynamic plays out. How often does the conquered, defeated civilization end up writing the cultural, spiritual, and legal blueprint for the empire that defeated them? When you walk through the streets of modern Lamphun in northern Thailand today, that ancient legacy is still vividly alive. You can see it in traditions like the Slak Yam ceremony, an elaborate festival involving towering, colorful offerings and processions that specifically honor the memory of Queen Kamadevi. The art, the faith, the architecture you see is not just a Thai legacy. The political timeline might be broken and the chronicles might have manipulated the calendar, but the ghost of an ancient, brilliant Mon kingdom is still living right there in the stones.
It is a testament to the enduring power of culture over conquest.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.